There's a moment in life when doing the right thing feels exactly like ruining everything. Not later, not eventually, right there in that moment. Because the truth isn't the problem, it's who the truth is about and what it's going to cost you. Greg didn't hesitate when it was just numbers. He didn't hesitate when it was strangers. But this time, when he opened that report and saw her name at the center of it, for the first time in 10 years, he almost looked away. Let's go back to the beginning, because this story didn't start with fraud. It started the way most dangerous things start, quietly, innocently, with a man just doing his job. In Heartland Bank, Greg didn't need to make noise to be heard. He just had to show up. The moment he walked through the doors of any branch for an internal audit, something changed in the air. Phones went silent. Conversations got shorter. Staff, who had been relaxed 30 seconds earlier, suddenly remembered every rule they were supposed to be following. Not because Greg was aggressive, not because he shouted or threatened, but because everyone knew one thing about him: he always found what was hidden. Greg was the head of compliance and audit in a city that had more than 10 branches. 10 years in the compliance and audit team. He had seen every trick, every shortcut, every creative explanation for why a number looked the way it looked, and he had never, not once, let anything slide. His team members had a saying about him: "Olga Greg doesn't catch fraud. He waits for fraud to make one mistake, and then he's already there." That was Greg. Precise, disciplined, unshakable. His closest friend was John from risk management, a man who was everything Greg was not. Loud, very social, always laughing. One evening, John came into the compliance office after everyone else had left, dropped into a chair, and looked at Greg the way he did when he was about to say something true and unwelcome. "You know your problem," Greg kept typing. "What?" "You've built a wall around yourself so high that even the right person wouldn't know how to get in." Greg shrugged. "I don't need anyone to get in." John was quiet for a moment. "Not yet," he said, after staring at Greg for a few seconds. The day Sandra was transferred from the NATO branch was like any other day. She was an account officer, which meant she handled clients directly. Accounts, transactions, relationships, a marketer, the fast side of banking, where balance sheets have to live up to standard. Greg noticed her the way he noticed everything, not because he was looking, but because something made him stop. There was a client causing a scene in the banking hall, loud, furious, the kind of anger that had been building for days and finally found somewhere to explode. Other staff were flinching, trying to calm him down quickly, talking over each other. Greg stepped out of his office to see what was happening. Sandra was already in front of the man, but she wasn't trying to silence him. She just waited, stood completely still and let him finish. And when he finally ran out of words, she said quietly, "Sir, I understand, but if we rush this, we'll make it worse. Let me fix it properly." 4 sentences, and the man, who had been a storm 30 seconds ago, went calm. Greg watched that, then went back to his desk. Control like that is rare, he thought, and he filed it away, the way he filed everything away, without knowing yet what he would do with it. She came to his office 2 days later, knocked once, stepped in, greeted his team, and placed a file on his desk. "I wanted to confirm something before I proceed. I'd rather be sure than be wrong." He stared at her briefly. This was the first time they would be talking to each other. He reviewed the file thoroughly, as he usually did. Everything clean. No shortcuts, no missing approvals. "This is fine," he said, as he finally looked up at her. She had been standing patiently while he did his review. She didn't leave immediately. She looked at him the way people do when they're deciding whether to say something they probably shouldn't. Then, "You know, they say you're very serious." She paused as she looked at him. "And?" he asked, prompting her to finish her statement. She smiled slightly. "I just wanted to see for myself." He almost smiled. Almost. Most staff treated Greg like a thunderstorm, something to be avoided, waited out, survived. She had just walked in and teased him, like it was the most natural thing in the world. After that, she came by regularly, always with a reason at first. Then the reasons started mattering less than the conversations around them. She was sharp. She asked questions that went deeper than necessary. She had opinions she stated clearly and changed when she was wrong, which Greg found rarer than it should have been. He started looking forward to their conversations. Then he started noticing things, like how she rubbed the side of her temple when she was thinking hard, but never let it show on her face. Like the way she laughed, not loudly, but genuinely, like something had caught her completely off guard. She noticed things about him, too, like how he always let his coffee go cold because he was too focused on his work and had forgotten to drink it. One afternoon, she walked past his open door, stopped, came back in, and swapped his cold cup for a fresh one from the cafe downstairs. He looked up. She shrugged. "You were going to drink it cold and pretend it was fine." He looked at the cup, then at her. "Thank you." She left before it could become a moment, but it already was. His team members noticed. Other colleagues noticed. John noticed before Greg admitted anything to himself. As they were going home one evening, he just said, "She's different." Greg frowned. "Who?" "Sandra, of course," John answered, laughing. "She's a colleague," Greg said, focusing on the traffic ahead and avoiding John's piercing eyes. John smiled the way he did when he already knew something you hadn't caught up to yet. "Sure." Then there was Amanda, Sandra's closest friend in the branch, also an account officer, observant in the way that quietly loyal people always are, taking in more than they ever let on. The first time she spoke to Greg directly, she said it almost playfully. "Sir, you're too serious." He replied evenly, "Someone has to be." She smiled, but even in that first interaction, Amanda was watching. She had seen how Sandra came back from Greg's office. She had noticed that Sandra's mood on any given day seemed connected to whether she had spoken to Greg. And Amanda, who had been Sandra's closest friend long before Heartland Bank, had quietly decided something. If Greg cared about Sandra the way it looked like he did, that could be useful. Not in a cold way, in the way that loyal people think when someone they love is carrying something heavy and they are looking for any shelter they can find. She noted Greg, filed him away, and said nothing, for now. Months passed, and what grew between Greg and Sandra didn't arrive with a declaration or a dramatic moment. It just settled in. Long conversations that outlasted the workday. Lunches that started as practical and became something both of them protected. An ease with silence that usually takes years between two people. He told her things he hadn't said to anyone, about the loneliness of a role where everyone is performing for you, about the weight of being the person who enforces the rules in a building full of people who resent the rules existing. She understood that loneliness in a different way, from the other side, as someone who had always had to work twice as hard to be taken seriously in rooms that weren't built with her in mind. For the first time in years, Greg felt like his life outside of compliance reports had weight to it. Real weight. The kind that makes you realize how empty it was before. Amanda watched all of it, and she was glad, because Amanda knew things about Sandra that Greg didn't know yet, things Sandra had never told him, things that had been quietly running underneath Sandra's polished, capable surface since long before she arrived at this branch. Amanda knew the full weight of what Sandra was carrying, and she had spent months hoping, quietly, desperately, that whatever Greg and Sandra were building might somehow become the reason Sandra finally found a way out. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Greg had just returned from an impromptu audit at a sister branch. He was reviewing some routine compliance reports, the kind of review that becomes almost automatic after 10 years, when one account stopped him. Nothing obvious, no red flag, no system alert, just a high-value corporate account that gave him that feeling, the quiet one, the one he had learned after a decade never to ignore. He called for the physical file. All documentation was in order. Correct approvals, clean signatures, proper timestamps. He reviewed it again, and slowly, like a picture develops in a dark room, the details began to appear.
Transactions structured just below the amount that triggers a mandatory report. Approvals arriving at intervals that were too consistent. Money moving from multiple customer accounts in careful, controlled amounts, funneled into linked accounts, all managed by the same person. The picture wasn't messy, it was engineered, and the person who had engineered it had been doing it for a long time. He checked the account officer's name, paused, read it again. Sandra. For a moment, just a moment, his mind did something it had never done before. It tried to explain it. No, she's meticulous. She's precise. There must be a reason for the pattern. He noticed what he was doing, and it unsettled him. Because that, right there, is how people get buried in things they were supposed to prevent. He kept pulling records, long after his team had gone home. And the further back he went, the worse it became. This wasn't a recent mistake. The earliest transaction tied to the structure was dated almost 2 years ago, before she even transferred to this branch. She hadn't arrived at Heartland Bank and fallen into something. She had arrived already inside it. The scheme was sophisticated. Customer funds moved in structured amounts below reporting limits. The money was invested quietly, profits extracted, principals returned to prevent suspicion. A network of linked accounts, all under her management, formed the architecture. And at the center of all of it, her name. He sat with it overnight, did not sleep. The next morning, he sent her one message: "Come to my office, close the door." She arrived within minutes, and the moment she saw his face, she knew. Not from guilt, from knowing him. She sat down slowly. He turned the screen toward her. "I need you to explain this to me." She looked at the records for a long time. The transactions, the linked accounts, the 2-year trail. Then she looked at him. "How far back did you go?" "Far enough," he said. Silence. "It started before I came here," she said quietly. "I didn't build this. I was already inside it by the time I understood what it really was. And by the time I did, there were people involved who weren't going to let me simply walk away." "You could have reported it instead of continuing." She looked at him steadily. "And what would have happened to me if I had?" The silence after that question was long and honest. Then she leaned forward slightly, and the register of the conversation shifted. Greg. Not sir, not his title, his name, the way she said it when no one else was around. Everything between us, the conversations, the trust, what this has been becoming, that's real. You know it is. Her voice was quiet, steady. "I'm not using it to negotiate with you. I'm saying it because I need you to see me as a person right now, not just a name at the bottom of a report." She held his gaze. "If you submit that report, it doesn't stop with me. You know how these investigations spread. It goes up, it goes sideways, it touches people you haven't even looked at yet, and it ends everything between us. I'm asking you," she said, "to find another way, not to erase what happened, just to give me a chance that a public investigation won't. I'm asking because I trust you, because you are the only person in this building I actually trust." He looked at her for a long time, and the most frightening thing in that moment was not the fraud, it was how genuine she was. She wasn't performing, she wasn't calculating, she meant every word, and he felt every word. "Give me time," he said, and the moment it left his mouth, he knew he had stepped somewhere dangerous. That same evening, as Greg sat alone in his office staring at the report, there was a knock at his door. He looked up. Amanda. She stepped in without waiting to be invited, closed the door behind her, and sat down across from him with the quiet deliberateness of someone who had been rehearsing this moment. "She told me you know," Amanda said. Greg said nothing. Amanda looked at him steadily. "I've known Sandra for 7 years, long before this bank, long before any of this." She paused. "She's not a bad person, sir. She's a person who made a bad decision a long time ago and couldn't find the door out." "That's not," Greg started. "I know what it is," Amanda said quietly. "I'm not here to tell you it isn't fraud. I'm here to tell you who she is outside of it." She leaned forward slightly. "You've seen it yourself, the way she handles people, the way she shows up, the way she is with you. A brief pause. That's not an act. That's who she actually is. Greg looked at his screen. Amanda. She's never had anyone look at her the way you do, Amanda said, simply, without drama. And I think you know that what you have with her is real. I think that's exactly why you told her to give you time instead of submitting that report tonight. The room was very quiet. I'm not asking you to break any rules, Amanda continued. I'm just asking you to remember that behind every name on a report, there's a person, and sometimes the person is worth more than the system. She stood up. That's all I came to say. And she left. Greg sat there for a long time after she was gone, because Amanda hadn't said anything he hadn't already been telling himself. She had just said it out loud, and somehow that made it harder to dismiss. For 3 days, Greg went through the motions, meetings, reports, normal conversations, but underneath all of it, that report sat on his screen, open, waiting, and every time he looked at it, he didn't see transactions and linked accounts. He saw her, the cold coffee she replaced without being asked, the way she listened without preparing what she'd say next, the conversation where she had told him things that took courage to say, the version of his life that had started to feel for the first time in years like it was actually meant for him. And he thought about covering it up, not forever, not carelessly. After all, if he didn't bring it up, it would be difficult for any other auditor to find it. Maybe just managing it quietly, controlling the damage. There were ways to do it. He knew the systems well enough. He was almost convincing himself it was the right thing. Almost. The third night he sat alone. The office was empty, late, just him and the screen. The report was complete. Every transaction traced, every account named, every pattern documented across 2 years, 1 click away from submission. He stared at it. It was a clear case of fraud. Nothing else could explain this. And then, quietly, clearly, with no noise left in the room, he thought about what he was actually considering. Not just protecting Sandra, but becoming part of it. Because silence at his level wasn't neutrality. It was a choice. It was choosing every customer whose money had moved through those accounts. Real people, ordinary people, who trusted this bank with what they had saved and deciding they mattered less than his feelings. It was choosing to be the man who looked at fraud, understood it completely, and clicked away. He thought about his team who looked up to him, his reputation, the entire branch that sat up straighter when he walked in. What did all of that mean if this was the moment he decided it was inconvenient? He thought about Amanda sitting across from him. Sometimes the person is worth more than the system. He understood why she said it. He even understood why she believed it. But he also understood something Amanda hadn't considered. The customers whose money funded Sandra's scheme, they were people too. Ordinary people, with their own lives, their own struggles, their own reasons for trusting a bank with what they had, little or much. Were they worth less because he didn't know their names? He moved his hand to the mouse. He thought of Sandra again, the woman who had stolen his heart. He clicked submit. The silence afterwards was the kind that fills a room, not empty, heavy, the weight of something irreversible. The fallout was immediate, and it was total. An internal investigation was launched within 48 hours. More auditors arrived from the head office, and what they found, using Greg's documentation as the foundation, was far bigger than even he had traced.
The scheme had been running across multiple branches for nearly 3 years, a coordinated network of account officers, 10 in total, siphoning customer funds, money invested in short-term instruments, profits distributed quietly, principals returned to prevent suspicion. A network of linked accounts, all under her management, formed the architecture, and at the center of all of it, her name. She did not look at him when they led her out of the building. He stood at the window of his office and watched, and he felt something that surprised him. Not relief, not the clean satisfaction of a case closed, just a long, deep quiet, the kind
that lives in the space after a decision that cannot be undone. As the investigation widened, the auditors began interviewing everyone who had been close to the account officers involved. Amanda was called in, and what emerged was uncomfortable. She hadn't stolen anything, she hadn't moved any funds, but she had known. Not the full picture, not every account and every figure, but enough. She had known something was wrong long before any report was filed, and she had said nothing. She had come to Greg's office instead and asked him to look away. Her suspension came quietly. A formal query, a panel, serious questions about her own conduct and judgment. She didn't fight it loudly. She just cleared her desk. On her way out, she passed Greg in the corridor. She didn't stop, just looked at him once, with the expression of someone who had been loyal to the very end and was now only beginning to understand what that loyalty had actually cost her. You chose them. Then she was gone. John came by later that evening, sat across from Greg without saying anything for a long time. Then, quietly, "You did the right thing." Greg nodded. Neither of them said anything after that. Weeks later, as the investigation expanded and the full picture became public, one more thing became clear. If Greg had stayed silent, he wouldn't have saved Sandra. He would have gone down with her. His access to those records was documented. His proximity to her was visible to anyone who looked. The moment external investigators arrived, and with fraud of this scale they always arrived, the silence of the head of compliance would have been the loudest detail in the entire case file. He wouldn't have protected her, he would have destroyed himself, and she would have gone down anyway. The easy choice was never actually easy. It was just a slower way to the same ending, with more people buried along the way. Here is what no one tells you about doing the right thing. It doesn't always feel like the right thing. Sometimes it feels like loss. Sometimes it feels like betrayal. Sometimes it feels like choosing strangers over the person standing right in front of you. But integrity isn't what you have when everything is fine. It's what you discover about yourself when everything you care about is on the line. Greg didn't lose Sandra because he made the wrong choice. He lost her because he refused to make the easy one. And somewhere in the space between those two things, he found out who he actually was, not just as a compliance officer, as a man.
The truth doesn't ask for a convenient time. It just asks, when it matters most, whose side are you on? If you were Greg, and the person at the center of that report was someone who had made your world feel alive again, would you have clicked submit? Or would you have told yourself that love was reason enough to find another way? And what about Amanda? She never stole a thing. She just chose loyalty over truth. Was she wrong? Most people believe they would do the right thing, right up until it costs them something real. So ask yourself honestly, what would you have done?